This is Crappy to Happy, and I am your host, Cass Dunn. I'm a clinical and coaching psychologist and mindfulness meditation teacher, and of course, author of the Crappy to Happy books. In this show, I bring you conversations with interesting, inspiring, intelligent people who are experts in their field and who have something of value to share that will help you feel less crappy and more happy. Today, I am so excited to share an extraordinary story of friendship, resilience, and the life-changing power of generosity. Joining me are two incredible women. Lisa Messenger is a global pioneer in entrepreneurship and publishing, and Sarah Megginson, a leading voice in financial journalism and personal finance. You may know Lisa as the founder and CEO of the Messenger Group, creator of Collective Hub. She is the author of over 40 books. She has many, many more accolades to her name. Sarah has spent 2 decades empowering readers through her work as a lifestyle journalist, editor, and financial literacy advocate. Their story begins over a decade ago as colleagues and collaborators, but their friendship deepened when Sarah made the extraordinary offer to be Lisa's surrogate after Lisa's long and heartbreaking journey with infertility. Together, they have navigated this deeply personal and inspiring experience, resulting in the birth of Hugo and a bond that makes them chosen family. I want to say up front that while this is a story of fertility and surrogacy, it is actually about so much more than that. There is a lesson here, messages here for anybody listening who may be experiencing challenge or adversity. So I would really encourage you to take a listen. It is an amazing story. Here is my conversation with Sarah and Lisa. Lisa and Sarah, welcome to the Crappy to Happy podcast.
I love that name. Such a great name for a podcast. So happy to be here.
Isn't it? I feel like it's just so many people's lives, isn't it? How do we turn it from crappy to happy? I love it.
Right? It's all encompassing, all encompassing. That's what I love about it. You can fit everything into the crappy to happy theme. Speaking of which, your story, the two of you, it's incredible. I devoured your book. Congratulations. So well done.
Thank you.
And it has such a happy ending, but the show is called Crappy to Happy. So let's briefly touch on the crappy, if that's okay.
Luckily, the happy outweighs the crappy, but there was certainly a lot of crappy. Oh, speaking of, here is happy right now.
Oh, can we meet Happy?
Well,
Where's little Happy Hugo?
He's gone with Daddy.
All right. So Lisa, to get your beautiful Hugo, you spent 8 years, as I understand it, 18 rounds of IVF.
Yeah.
And spent many hundreds of thousands of dollars pursuing various fertility options.
Yeah.
That is quite a journey.
Yeah.
What was the impact on your physical and mental health of that process? And how did you keep going? More to the point, what kept you going?
Thank you. That is a big question. So I would say physical, mental, and financial.
Yeah.
So let's go through those quickly. Yeah, I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot. And I have to be really careful not to, I'm good at compartmentalizing and desensitizing and detaching from the story. And I think it's, Sarah and I talk about this a lot. I'm like, we're getting into that, oh yeah, this just happened. But actually, for anyone who is going through it, I feel you. I was you. Hugo's determined to come onto this podcast. Him with a sliding
The joy
door.
of home recording.
No, but you know what? It's just real life.
It's real life, exactly.
I wouldn't have it any other way because, as we said, he did take so long to get here. But I think for anyone listening, I'll talk about those 3 components and then how I kept going. So the physicality of it is a lot, and the emotional side of it is a lot. So, I mean, the very quick click notes that this is why we've written a book, really, to shine the light and really help people understand it all. But my cliff notes are, got pregnant in 2015 with my former partner, had a miscarriage. We shortly broke up thereafter. I went to Bali to, have a good cry. But on my birthday, I decided to do something for someone else, and I put it out on Facebook at the time and said, what shall I do? And people said, oh, go to the Jodie O'Shea orphanage. So I looked on their website, looked at all the items they needed for the orphanage, and I went and spent this beautiful day with all these children and fell in love with one little 6-month-old baby, Gracie, and proceeded to spend the next 3 days there. And because I've had my own businesses for 23 years, and a lot of what I do is I'm an author, and I've chosen to turn, adversity into positivity and share the lessons learned. So I was like, right, I could do this. I want to adopt this little baby. And so probably for the next 6 months, I was determined. So I went through trying to do this cross-border adoption, and there was just so much red tape and bureaucracy, and I would have had to move to Bali for like 2 years, and it was really complex. So that wasn't to be, sadly, and that sort of the miscarriage broke my heart, then that broke my heart in a different way. But then, and this is kind of answering your how did you keep going? I think in life when there's like hope and possibility and someone presents another opportunity or potential answer, that's kind of what keeps us going often. So my next one was a friend of mine had become pregnant. She was also single, as I was then, with donor sperm. So I was like, right, okay, I'm going to do this. And so I just really tried everything. And I then went down the route of, well, when you go after donor sperm, it's not that simple. I firstly needed to, sign up for IVF to have my own eggs harvested. And then I had to, go shopping online for a baby daddy and do all of that. And then, we had to make embryos and then ensure that there were enough viable embryos to do the implantation. So I went through 2 rounds of that with 2 different men because man A wasn't available by the time I had to do man B. So I did that. And neither of those worked, sadly. And then shortly after I met my now partner Stephen, and I mean this is why it's a long story, but I think it's
Yeah.
important for people to understand what keeps you going and, all of the pieces. Anyway, we tried naturally. We then proceeded to do a further 14 rounds of IVF, and then Sarah came into the picture. But there's so much to unpack.
I know, and it's all in the book.
And I didn't really answer your question about the emotional, physical, financial, and the mindset piece, but let's keep going, and that will come up, I'm sure, as we chat.
I just wanted to throw in there with my psychology hat on as I was reading. This is exactly what you're talking about, Lisa. I don't know if you've ever heard of hope theory. And when I did my coaching psychology masters, 20 years ago, that was one of the things that we learned was about hope theory and this concept that hope is kind of foundational to human well-being, and that what it requires is a clear goal, a pathway, and some sense of agency. And if one pathway is blocked, if you can find another pathway, you can remain hopeful. And through your whole story, and I was thinking throughout your business journey as well, it seems that it's just this constantly finding another pathway. If one pathway gets blocked, to find another
Mm,
pathway. But when there's no more pathways or you don't feel a sense of agency, that's when people become hopeless and
mm.
that's when people fall into despair. I thought it was just useful to share that for listeners too, because it's an interesting concept.
I love that, and I think you've nailed it, and I'm aware that I won't say her to speak as well. But on that, just leaning into the mindset piece, I think that absolutely resonates with me. I think for years, in business, that's what I've done just all the time. And then, also in crisis management and a variety of other things. I've always just thought, okay, if that door is closed, well, what's something else? And I think it is just that little glimmer of hope and possibility that kept me going. And I'd like to think that, now that you've shared the hope theory, I hope that people are listening and also know, when is your edge, when is enough for you. I don't know. Sometimes I think, my God, I can't believe I went that long. But I did. And now I have this beautiful
And
baby.
the one other thing I wanted to ask you about, Lisa, before we get to the happy, is um, you've also been really open about the fact that you had mental health struggles when you were younger. You gave up drinking. Congratulations, 20 years sober, which is an amazing
Thank you.
achievement. And that through this process, there came a point where you were really pushed to your edge in a really scary way. And I wanted to ask you, I guess, from your experience, is there enough mental health support available for people going through fertility treatment? And also from the personal perspective, what do you think men and women need to have in place in terms of their own checking that they are actually kind of fit for the process and have enough scaffolding in place to support them through the process?
Thank you. That is such a good and important question, and one that we've not been asked yet. And I think it's absolutely imperative. And I can only speak from my experience, but also witnessing a lot of what's going on around me. So what Cass is referring to is, yeah, during my 20s, I was often suicidal and sort of had no semblance of who I was and leading life according to other people's expectations. And then, was using alcohol as a crutch and self-sabotaging and keeping myself small and put down the drink. And then the work started, really. And so I've been on a, I guess 20-year journey now, longer even, of really sort of self-development. So even with all of those tools and skill sets and, things in my toolkit, I still reached a very, very, very dark and low point. And I think that's a combination of things. I think it's the drugs that I was putting into my body. I mean, I've had a sober body in every way, shape, and form for over 20 years now. And, I'm just pumping myself full of all sorts of hormones and things. And then also, hearing 16 times, oh, you're not pregnant this time. Like, that takes a toll. And also, I hadn't spoken publicly at all. And I'm a open book. I've written 40 or so of them. So I literally use my life kind of as a human guinea pig. But I didn't talk about this at all. So all of that really started to have a massive effect. Now, I mean, I feel like we could speak for hours on this, and I don't want to take up the whole podcast, but I think there's a lot of humanizing and a lot of empathy that needs to be added to the fertility industry. I feel like a lot of it is very clinical and rote, and there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape and a lot of money exchanging hands. And I think oftentimes, in my experience, there wasn't a lot of care given. And I actually did tell my fertility clinic, I'm actually suffering quite severely. Like, it didn't affect me on a lot of the rounds, but there are a couple where I actually had suicidal ideations again and really started feeling very, very low. Luckily for me, I sort of have been around the traps and explored myself enough that I kind of went, okay, I feel like that's drugs and it's something that's in my system. Like, I was able to kind of be the watcher watching in and recognize that actually the dark thoughts, I think, were being induced by something kind of that wasn't me. It felt like a chemical thing, which was fortunate that I've done the work. But
Yeah.
I mentioned that to the clinic, and they were like, "Oh, of course you're upset. You didn't get pregnant this time." And I was like, "Nah, there is something much bigger at play." And I did talk a lot about dosages and things. And so, yeah, I do feel like there is some real concern out there, and I do feel like people need to equip themselves, mentally to go on this journey. Another thing is, and I'm sorry I'm taking up so much time here,
You don't have to apologize.
but I also feel like one of the things that I have learned over the years that helps my mindset is exercise. So the physical side of things really helps with my mental health. But part of what happens, certainly the protocols that I was advised of when you do an implantation, so that's, putting the embryo into me, which I did 16 times, I was told not to exercise or get my heart rate up for 2 weeks after that. So that's in total 32 weeks of not being able to exercise, which for the most part is really a big tool that I've used over the years to kind of, help me with my mental health. And so I found that very difficult as well. I mean, I then lent on meditation and journaling and screaming into the wind, and anything else that I had. But I did really struggle with that. And one of the other cruel side effects of so many injections is that I looked pregnant. I was very, very
Mm.
bloated for the best part of probably 6.5 years or something. I looked pregnant. So there's a whole lot. And the financial side, I'll just mention quickly because I feel like, I don't take it lightly that we were in a position where we could actually do this. And I know there are a lot of people who aren't. And we sold a house and made a lot of sacrifices in order to do it because my partner Stephen said, well, which was so sobering. if that is what we want, a baby, it doesn't matter if it costs $1 or $1,000,000, like, let's put everything on the line. And we
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Enough about me.
Sarah, you at some point threw out the comment, if you ever need a surrogate. Can you tell me what compelled you to make that offer? And were you really serious?
No. No, I wasn't. Like, it wasn't something I had thought about or that I'd, consciously come to that lunch that day thinking I'm gonna offer this. It was more just, we were just catching up on life, and Lisa said her IVF wasn't going very well, and I just threw it out there like, "Oh, well, if you ever need a surrogate, I'm here." But I'd actually just discovered that day that Lisa was trying to have a baby. Before that, she'd kept, for someone who is quite public about what's going on in her life, she'd actually kept it quite under wraps. So I was really surprised that she'd been trying for so long, and that it had been quite a private journey. So I just kind of came out like, "Oh, well, if you ever need a surrogate, I'm here." It's one of those things where it was a seed planted. I think it was, at the time, it was not what Lisa needed or wanted, but it planted a seed there, so that many years later, when she was at that point, we reconnected on it, and then that became the seed that became Hugo.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. At the time that you threw that comment out there, like you said, so Lisa, that was not on your radar at the time. And you talk in the book about, we all get to a certain point of being open to another option in our own time. And that wasn't on your radar at the time.
No, it wasn't. Keep going.
But so by the time you went back to Sarah and said, "Hey, how about that? Still interested in being a surrogate?" Like, how much time had passed? Because that's really, things had changed for you, Sarah, right? You had had
Mm,
surgery. You had said to
mm.
your doctor, "No more babies." So, let's just talk about that. When she
Yeah.
came back, what was your response?
Yeah, it was 4 years between those two conversations. So when I first threw it out there, Lisa must have been about a year and a half into it and had done a few rounds. So then it was another 4 years later before we reconnected on it. And again, I asked the same question: "How's the IVF going?" Because at first, during that first conversation, Lisa said, "Oh, I've actually been doing IVF," and I said, "Oh, how's it going?" "Oh, not so great, actually." "Oh, if you ever need a surrogate, I'm here." Then fast forward 4 years later, over text, we have the same conversation. "How's the IVF going?" "Not so great, actually. Are you still interested in being a surrogate?" And I said, "Yes." But my situation had changed in that time. I'd finished having children myself. I'd had some hernias from my pregnancies, and I'd had pretty extensive surgery to repair my midsection. And my surgeon at the time said, "This is a surgery you have once you finish having kids, because to get pregnant afterwards is quite risky. You can risk, tearing the mesh, and you can risk further hernias and things like that." So when I went back to Lisa, when she came back to me and said, "Are you still interested?" That was one of the first calls I made after my husband was to call my surgeon and make sure it was viable, because the last thing I wanted to do at that point was to give Lisa false hope and say, "Yes, I'm interested," and then come back and say, "Oh, this is actually not possible." So I quickly contacted him, and he was amazing. He gave me the go ahead. He said, "Look, hopefully there'll be no damage, and afterwards we'll put you back together again if we need to, and just make sure you don't have twins." So that was kind of a part of the brief going in. I was like, "We're not putting two in there, please."
So you went back and said yes. Was there any part of you that thought, "Fuck, what the fuck?
Oh, yeah, at many times. I think at many times there were many moments where I was like, "Holy shit, what am I doing? Why
What
am I
am I
getting
doing?"
why am I getting pregnant, voluntarily in my 40s? It kicks your ass." And also just like, it's a big thing to jump into. It's getting involved in another couple in a really intimate way, and hoping that I can do something really positive for them, but also knowing that pregnancies end in miscarriage, and they end in sometimes negative outcomes. And I was just really, really hopeful that surely, after 6 years of trying, because I think they'd been trying for 6 years by the time I came along, and I thought, surely after 6 years, there's some good karma waiting there, and this is going to be this baby is meant to be. Surely this is going to work, and it did.
As it turns out. So on the face of it, this is such a beautiful story of friendship and this selfless, gesture. It's lovely. But as you just mentioned, Sarah, like potentially it can also be really fraught and complicated.
Yeah.
So, so how, well, let's start with you had to do up a contract. Like you have to come to some agreement about what do you what's your obligation, what's your requirement, what's the legality of it. So let's start with that.
Mm.
What is the legality of surrogacy in Australia?
Well, we do have a whole chapter about it in the book that breaks it down into full detail because it is quite complicated. But the bottom line, the Cliff's Notes version, is that you're not allowed to do commercial surrogacy in Australia. So you're not allowed to pay someone or really give them any benefit beyond repaying the costs they incur. So Lisa and Stephen paid for all of my medical expenses and anything that I needed for the pregnancy. Like I got gestational diabetes, so all of those medications were covered, and all of anything that I needed, like support garments and things like that. All of that stuff is covered, but anything that can be perceived as a benefit is not covered. And that gets complicated. Like even when I had my very first meeting with my lawyer, and I said, I have had this surgery in my abdomen. I've had my abs stitched back together, and I've got mesh implanted. So if after we give birth, if there's any damage there, I would just like that restored back to factory seconds. And she said, oh, we'd have to see about that. That might be considered a benefit. And I was like, how is that considered a benefit when it's not, I'm not improving. I'm not getting a boob job while you're in there. I'm just getting back to what I was, which was, safe and medically sound. I just want to go back to that. I don't want to end up worse off afterwards. I just want to get back to what I was. And she said, oh, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but it might be considered a benefit. And I thought, God, that's like in Australia, they really run it to the letter of the law here. So
Yeah.
yeah, you can, because there's no commercial industry around it. It is quite a small industry in Australia. There's only around 120 surrogacy births in Australia a year. About another 250 Australian families go overseas for a surrogate, where it is commercial and where there's a lot more of a kind of infrastructure around it. But then it gets very, very expensive.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. What I was surprised by was that, yeah, you draw up this contract and you say, this is what you'll do. And I know that you went back, Sarah, and said, hang on about you said I can't put anything on my body, but I will need to dye my hair. So you're having all of this
Yeah.
back and forth about
Yeah.
like what you're both prepared, what's acceptable. At the end of the day, though, the actual handing over of the baby is optional.
Well, yeah, the contract is not legally binding, which is wild. The
Wild.
lawyer, yeah, the lawyer said, it would certainly be taken into consideration if something happened, and by something happened, I mean if I refused to give the baby to Lisa and Stephen at the hospital, I guess, and we did hear a few stories where things went pear-shaped with surrogates and the intended parents, and things happened like the surrogate halfway through the pregnancy said, I don't want you involved from now on until the baby's birth, so you can come and collect the baby from the hospital when it's born, but between now and then I don't want to hear from you. That would have been, situations like that would just be so incredibly difficult to deal with. So there is so much trust that goes into this, and the contract is great. It's very good to get all the intentions down, but really, when you do this with someone, you have an immense amount of trust.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Lisa, so there's obviously it's so important that there be a really strong, solid foundation of trust there.
Yeah, well, I think I'm gonna come back to your hope theory because I love that, and I feel like, by the time this all happened, I was just like, "Whatever, yep, dying." Like like, I was just like I was so, you know, burnt out at the end of my road. I felt like I'd completely run out of options. I mean, for someone who's, a great optimist, I was like, I literally feel like I've tried every kind of natural and, medical possibility to bring a baby into the world. So by the time this like when Sarah's like, oh, is it okay if I dye my hair? I am like, dye it.
You can dye the baby's hair when it comes out if you need to.
But you know, I was just so grateful, I think. And I think Sarah's right. I mean, we're both a bit woo woo and spiritual. And I do think the universe finally did smile upon me and just say, here you go. Here is this goddess who just, not only carried my baby, but kind of carried me as a friend. And
Mm.
And it was just really all of it was just the most extraordinary experience, and just like it's indescribable sort of having someone who became a very best friend through the journey. I mean, we were close before, but it's so intimate, and the communication levels are so deep, and we go through so much together. So yeah, just indescribable how extraordinary it was. And also for all of the industry that I really struggled with so many times, we just had an extraordinary team by then. Like Dr. Drew Moffrey, who was obstetrician, was just so fun and amazing and helpful, and is still a wonderful friend. He just came to one of our launches a couple of days ago, and I texted him
Oh,
today, and he's part of the family now as well. So I do feel like, despite here's me compartmentalizing, despite all the paperwork and bureaucracy and red tape and craziness that you have to go through, for me, by that point, I kind of just said to Stephen, "You deal with all of that. Like, I just want to like enjoy this journey." And we did for the most part. I mean, maybe I've forgotten some tricky bits, but I haven't probably chosen to do that. But yeah, it was for the most part just amazing. Yeah.
the whole process of going through, for any woman who wants to have a baby, the going through getting pregnant, being pregnant, the amount of pressure to do things right, and I can't eat this and I can't get too stressed. I've had one baby and I know what that was like for myself. And the mother guilt, it starts well before actually being a mother. Like everything that you do, you feel guilty about. Sarah, you had 3 healthy babies, easy pregnancies before you carried Hugo. How much extra pressure did you feel to be the perfect pregnant woman, given that this was somebody else's
Yeah.
baby that you're bringing into the world?
Yeah, I think it was all very self-imposed pressure. Lisa and Stephen never put any pressure on me through the pregnancy. There was never any discussion of like, what are you eating, or, what's your diet, or anything like that. They were very hands-off, which was amazing, because I think that again could become something that would be a tricky dynamic if you had it with someone. I remember someone, I
For
can't remember
sure.
who, someone along the way said, "Oh, is it in the contract what you're allowed to eat?" And I was like, don't be ridiculous. Like, as if I'm going to be, I'm not going to, I've got 3 kids and I work, like I'm not going to be having a spirulina smoothie every day if that's what is required. Like I just have to get on with my life. So they never put any pressure on me at all. But I certainly felt a responsibility. So there were little things like I went to a wedding at one point, and I didn't normally, like when I'd been pregnant before with my kids, I would have had a little sip of champagne at the champagne toast. I didn't when I was pregnant with Hugo, because I just took every precaution to make sure that I needed to be able to hand on heart say that I'd done everything possible to grow him and deliver him safely. So didn't take any risks, and just did my best, kept my eye on the prize, and did my best to cook him for as long as possible. We got to 38 weeks, which was great. He was a very big baby, so I think any more than that could have been problematic. But yeah, I think the sense of responsibility was great, and it was self-imposed because I just really wanted to be part of their happy ending and not part of any story that was going to bring them any more heartache.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
one of my love languages is cooking, so I mean, we saw each other every week during the pregnancy, so I would, we live an hour and 15 minutes away, so I would trundle up the highway just to try and support with home-cooked meals or whatever I could. But it was like, you know, it's just a trust thing, and knowing that Sarah's an incredible human, and whatever she does is gonna be in everyone's best interest. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. As I was reading and I was thinking about the potential, like some of the things that you've just mentioned, Sarah, like the potential things that could come up, tricky communication or expectations or whatever. I was wondering if, in some ways, having a actual commercial arrangement might be easier. Like it's very transactional, but it's more like, well, this is what I'm paying you for. This is what you're going to
Mm.
do, versus the potential impact on a very close friendship if there are miscommunications or unmet
Mm.
expectations or whatever. Like,
It's actually a really good point. I've never thought about it like that, and no one's ever suggested that, but I think that is a really good point. I think especially the way we did it was kind of perfect because we're not family. I do think if we were family, there would be all of those different family dynamics at play. Like say we were siblings, you know, it might have been you were always mum's favorite, or or mum's cooking for you now that you're pregnant, she's not cooking for me, or whatever. Like, you know, we didn't have any of that stuff to deal with. But I think you are onto something there in the respect that there was a lot that you just have to navigate along the way, and not they didn't cause issues for us, but there were sometimes just slightly awkward conversations you wouldn't normally have, like, hey, I'm starting to get a bit too fat for my leggings, can I buy some maternity leggings? You know, it wasn't awkward for us, but they could be if you are someone who doesn't like asking for things, or if you know, there could be a range of ways that that gets interpreted either way. Lisa might have sat there and gone, oh God, I haven't thought about a maternity stuff yet. I mean, for me, I think I only bought a pair of maternity leggings and some support garments. That's the only thing I needed, because I dress in flowy dresses anyway. But there could have been lots of those little moments that just become awkward, or there's a mixed expectation around it or something. And I think you're right in the respect that I wouldn't have been annoyed at your suggestion I should have spirulina. Not that Lisa ever suggested that. But if the mother had said you need to have a celery smoothie every day or whatever, you know, that would just be part of the deal. So I think you're right in the respect that that could add a layer of just kind of clarity to something that could have areas of grey.
I think just to add on that, and Sarah and I have talked about this a lot. And it sort of leans Cass into your former question. Sarah and I have said it's probably wise for people undertaking surrogacy to have a lot more counseling and therapy throughout, because we were fortunate. Sarah is very direct next steps, and I am very people pleasing. So like it all worked, and we've done lots of work on ourselves as individuals. So like there was no,
But that people pleasy stuff could get really hard,
yeah,
you know, because you do in something like this, you do have to be quite direct about some things. So let's say, for instance, you did want me to have spirulina. Look at me stuck on my green smoothies. You know, if you're a people pleaser, you wouldn't ask for that stuff, and that could create a moment. So the legal kind of guidelines around the therapy and the therapy appointments were way too loose. We only needed them at the very beginning and the very end. And we're really lucky, as Lisa was just saying, that we both do a lot of work on ourselves. And I already had a psychologist, and I just dipped into them when I needed them. But I think someone who hasn't done that work and who doesn't access mental health support could have found it difficult at times. You need someone to help support you through something like this. And I think it should be monthly therapy at a minimum.
definitely. And also part of the reason that we've written the book is, a little bit to be advocates as well, to show what possibility is, but also a little bit of advocacy in there. And I think some of the pieces are just so overread, regulated and ridiculous. Like the fact that Hugo is about to turn 16 months old, and we still don't have a birth certificate or a Medicare card in our name and his name. Blah, blah. We could get into all the semantics around that. And that when he was 13 months old, Sarah and I and Stephen had to do a Supreme Court hearing for me to actually say that, yes, I'd tried hard enough to have a baby. I'm like, well, is the time for
Jesus.
that not before the baby's born? So being judged by a judge from a different
Really?
century. So there's things like that that I think definitely, and also from a monetary, financial support perspective, I think there's a lot that the industry can absolutely do to kind of get with the program of it in terms of the fertility piece and or the surrogacy piece. But at the other end of the spectrum, I think through Sarah and my experience and, recommendations, she goes really around like a crazy person
He's
out
not
there.
going to bed.
I think that, there could be some stronger things, and it probably just demonstrates how little thought has been or rigor has been given to it as a whole by the right people, in terms of, because we think there could be more therapy and more support from all sorts of things. I mean, that's a whole different thing. But I will say this as well. The book, we really don't want it just to focus on people that are wanting to get pregnant or wanting to find out more about surrogacy. Really, the theme is that's a true thread, but we hope that it has so much more mass appeal for anyone who's going through anything that's, adversity, or anyone who needs some hope, or, more than what we're talking about.
That's really clear. I would make that point too. The book, I mean, it's a fascinating story to read. There's so much in there, stuff that I didn't know about the surrogacy journey, and just such a fascinating story, to be honest. But through the whole thing, there are themes which are transferable to any other thing that you might be trying to do or achieve in life. I thought that was really well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we really wanted it to be an exploration of hope and possibility, so it came together beautifully.
It really did, and the weaving together of both of your personal stories and then your combined story was really well done. You touched on it really briefly, and you don't need to go into all the details, but I think it's still all in the book. But this is another thing I didn't realize. Your name's not on the birth certificate. Explain this to me. So, Sarah, your name goes on the birth certificate as the mother, and is it
Mhm.
your husband is the
And my
father?
husband, yeah.
Despite the fact he's got nothing to do with any of it.
No, I found that bit the strangest of all. I mean, putting me as the person who carried the baby, I can kind of understand if the regulations and the laws haven't caught up. I can understand the logic to that. The baby came out of me, so I can understand why they might do
Yeah.
that. But I don't understand why my husband got listed. If we weren't married, would he not have been listed? Or if I was single, would it have listed Stephen or would it have listed no father? Like, it's a very odd system. It seems very, very stuck in the dark ages and not at all. I even, when he was born, I was like, can I at least register him? I thought if it was at least Stephen's name on there, then we might be able to get the surname in there so that there's that continuity there. But it was just, yeah, it's
It sounds a
very,
little
very strange.
very strange. And so then you have to go through an adoption process, Lisa, to adopt your own
It's
child.
not actually, this is where it was so confusing. We thought that that was it, but it wasn't actually. It was similar. It's getting a parentage order essentially to, yeah, transfer him from Sarah and David to Stephen and I. Very laborious process.
And it is actually the same legal process that would happen if a family was, say, a couple was to have a child and they were to separate, then they would get a parentage order drawn up between the two parents. That's what we went through, that same court and the same system. So the court that we were going through was the same court that was hearing cases of, a family that had split up, which is, I think, the reason that's significant is that court is looking after the child's best interest. They're trying to hear from both sides. They're trying to make sure that whatever decision they make is going to be the safest and healthiest place for that child. And there's a lot of work that goes into that if a couple is separating. But for us, that rigor had already happened. We knew the family that he was going to. There wasn't a question, but we still had to do a lot. Like, it was a lot of court-ordered therapy and paperwork and meetings and lawyers' meetings and Zoom appointments and finally court hearings to confirm again and again and again that we are not his parents. They are his parents. We do not want custody. They have custody. They have had custody since the moment he was born. Like, just repeating the same info again and again. Like, it's a very clunky process.
Yeah. Last thing, Lisa, you talk about being a very, very independent, self-reliant, not, yes, you live your life publicly, but, emotionally, like never really being one to ask for help. You're a do-it-yourself kind of a person, clearly probably from early experiences, and you've probably done enough therapy to unpack
Oh
all that.
yeah, we can unpack that. And other issues, father issues, yep.
Yeah. But this is the ultimate asking for help. This is the ultimate being vulnerable and asking for help. I'd love to know how you feel and this connection that you formed with Sarah now. Like, how has this changed you as a person?
Yeah, I mean, oh, so many ways. I think, yeah, and some people may be able to relate to this. I am much more comfortable being the helper than asking for help. And it's something that I've really had to do a lot of therapy on and learn to actually ask for help. And, because sometimes we're not okay and we can't do it all on our own. And and it's also hard because I put myself into a public space and I write books on, living your best life. So when things aren't my best, it's hard to reach out and sort of admit that I also have shortcomings and that I also need help. Um, but I'm getting better at it. And it's so much easier when you do it because people want to help. Really, they do. That's the
Yeah.
thing. And so, I've certainly practiced it more and more. This was the ultimate outsource and the ultimate, put your hand up for help. But I think, again, I wasn't ready 4 years prior. I needed to really try a lot more things myself. And also, Stephen had to, come to it at his own time as well. And he was very protective of me, like, yes, I want you to carry your own baby, and, all these things. Um, but by the time Sarah had sort of texted and said, "Oh, by the way, how's the IVF going?" I was in a crisis moment helping other people in the floods in northern New South Wales and literally, you know, organizing helicopters and setting up evacuation centers and, handing out food and saving cats from roofs. Like I was really in the guts of it
I
all.
remember that.
And I think that was actually the perfect time because when Sarah's text came through and said, "Well, how's the IVF going?" I was just like, "Oh, help me." Like I was just vulnerable and open, really open, I think. And I was just like, not great, still want to be a surrogate on text. I just got shivers as I said it. And, that was the best thing I could have ever done because I just let my walls down. I was like, you know what? I'm run out. I just can't keep doing this on my own. I need you.
Yeah.
And it was really bizarre. I think that I really believe a lot in serendipity and synchronicity. And Sarah just didn't really even hesitate, even though, and despite having had, the mesh in her stomach and the stitches and everything, her first response was really, let me go check this out and see what's possible, which I was in complete disbelief about, but she did it. And since that day, every single time, without exception, she has fronted up and showed up for me, and I hope me for her. And so our friendship has just deepened, and yeah, it's like I would trust Sarah with anything now, and I hope she feels the same about me. And I'm still happy to be vulnerable and ask for things and fess up more things more often now,
Mhm.
and she never judges me. She's there and she supports me, and yeah, so I would say around that, be unafraid to ask for help. It's a lot less lonely when someone else is there beside you. And conversely, if you can be the one to help and support someone else, then put your hand up because it is life changing and extraordinary what bonds develop and how much easier and more joyful things become when, as we've called the book, The Power of Two.
Is there anything you would add to that, Sarah?
I think Lisa has, summarized that beautifully. And I think, you don't have to show up for people quite as dramatically as I did. You don't have to have a baby for someone. But even just the smallest things, that when you just are walking and someone smiles at you, it puts a little pep in your step. Saying good morning. My dad was always the type of person when we would go for a walk, he would say hello to everyone we walked past. It's something generational. Like our people these days, we don't talk to each other. We often heads down or heads in our phones. But even just those small moments of interaction and connection are so important. And the way I try to live my life and model for my kids is that doing for others is expansive for yourself. And I have the most ridiculously blessed life. And I think that is because I put out so much and I get blessed that back 1,000 times over. I've done this thing for Lisa, which was pretty major, but I continue to just be blessed in so many different ways. I've got beautiful, healthy kids and a great career and all of these amazing things in my life. And I think it's because I get to bask in that energy of what it feels like to connect with people and to be vulnerable and to experience pain and suffering with people and to be in the trenches with them and help find a way through that. Like that's what life is all about, is to get stuck in with other people and to get to the other side. And you have to have those really deep, difficult moments so that you can really appreciate the incredible highs on the other side. So, this whole experience with Lisa has been incredible because at the end of it, we got the highest of highs. Like, I don't know, there'll be many moments in life that can surpass that moment when Hugo was born and we all heard him squeal and you're just like, wow, what an experience to be part of.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Well, it is an extraordinary story. Thank you both for sharing it also just so courageously and vulnerably. The book is amazing. It's a credit to you both, and the whole story is obviously just wonderful. So congratulations, Lisa, on beautiful Hugo, both of you. And thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having us.
The Power of Two is available now in all bookstores. If you enjoyed this episode, please do share it with a friend. I am cooking up some exciting things for the show in 2025 and you will not want to miss any of it, so hit the plus button to subscribe so that you never miss an episode or an update. And if you really love the show, then I would love you so much if you would leave a 5-star rating on your favourite podcast app. Come and say hi to me on Instagram, Castan_XO or Crappy to Happy Pod. I cannot wait to catch you next week for another fabulous episode of Crappy to Happy.